Wednesday, I am hosting a cocktail party. I'm hosting cocktails, and you are invited. Unfortunately, it's a BYOB, and unfortunately, instead of having all of you into my house, you will be at your respective homes because of the pandemic. But it's my way of saying thank you to so many of you who have registered for the daily smirconish.com newsletter. We've just passed or are in the process of passing, because it fluctuates every day, 50,000 subscribers. Actually, 50,000 registrants, because it costs nothing. All you need to do is register, and then each and every morning by about 7:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, you will have in your in-bin my read-in as I'm about to go on my SiriusXM radio program. So it's a nice way, and people tell me what they most enjoy is that they use their smart device waking up to scroll through what I've determined are the key headlines of the day. And you know what I'm seeking to do, as I seek to do both on radio and on television every day via the newsletter. I'm trying to give you balance so that on a particular day, maybe you'll think that the stories that I've selected lean left or lean right. But I think you'll find that over several days and in composite, it's a pretty balanced presentation. So Wednesday, I thought we'd all raise a glass together, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, kind of like what we did for the virtual launch party for Things I Wish I Knew Before I Started Talking. So Wednesday at 7, I hope you'll just log on. The key is you need to be a smirconish.com subscriber or registrant. Just go to my website and you can make that happen, because Wednesday, kind of like Willy Wonka and the Golden Ticket, the Wednesday edition of the newsletter is where James, the editor, is going to put the key, the login information, and then you'll be hooked in through SignalWire. Bottom line, join me for a cocktail on Wednesday, okay? A nice way to welcome getting out of the pandemic and the onset of spring. Today on CNN, I'm going to host Earl Grey. I love that name, Earl Grey, who represents one of the other officers, one of the three officers, not Derek Chauvin, one of the three cops, in his case, Thomas Lane, who is charged with aiding and abetting. And of course, these other three former police officers are all kind of holding their breath and seeing what happens with Derek Chauvin, because presumably if Chauvin were to be acquitted, they wouldn't go to trial. Because if Chauvin didn't do something wrong, then what would they be aiding and abetting? Bottom line, they've got a lot of skin in this game. So I want to hear what Earl Grey has to say in terms of what he's seeing in this trial so far. We're 2 weeks in. I think that the prosecution has but one witness left. I mean, they as both sides do, and this is typical, they list many, many, many more witnesses potentially than they really intend to call, just leaving all options open. But with the testimony of the medical examiner now in, and that concluded Friday, they really don't have anything left to do. They could have rested after the medical examiner. Hell, they could have rested a long time ago, because I think a lot of the testimony has been duplicative. So where does the trial stand? I had this conversation on SiriusXM yesterday, indeed all week long, and I'm eager to have it here as well. I think, I'll give you the bottom line first. I think that the case has gone in very well for the prosecution. I think that they very methodically checked all the boxes that they need to check off in order to win a conviction of Derek Chauvin. Do I think that it's a slam dunk? I don't think that it's a slam dunk. I do believe that it all comes down to the causation defense. I think that they lose on the question of excessive force. A very quick and overly simplistic thumbnail, if you'll permit me. He's facing 3 charges. He is facing charges for second-degree unintentional murder. That's the highest charge in terms of severity that he faces. That is a charge that necessitates the jury finding that Floyd died while Chauvin was assaulting him. He's also facing third-degree murder. You'll remember this charge went away for a while and then it came back. This is, I'll read you the legal standard, even though it's kind of murky and hard to understand. By perpetrating an act eminently dangerous to others and evincing a depraved mind. You may say that a depraved mind is what you see in Derek Chauvin keeping his knee on Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, especially the 3 or so minutes at the end where Floyd looks lifeless. If they can't get the murder charges, then the fallback is second-degree manslaughter, which means that they're seeking to hold Chauvin accountable for being culpably negligent, that he took an unreasonable risk for George Floyd. That charge carries a presumptive sentence of between 41 and 57 months. And the question is, would the community in Minneapolis be satisfied with a finding of manslaughter? If you believe the New York Times, then Derek Chauvin was prepared to plead guilty before this trial ever began to more serious charges, but that Bill Barr rejected a third-degree murder conviction. And that Barr thought it was just too soon in the process. Chauvin, if you believe that account, was willing to take up to 10 years, but wanted to serve it in federal prison, and the feds wouldn't buy into it, and then all bets were off. Could this trial still end in a plea? Theoretically, it could. Theoretically, it could. Okay, so what do I think the status is thus far? Again, overly simplistic, just quickly breaking this down into two distinct responsibilities that the prosecution has to convince the jury. The first is that an excessive amount of force was used against George Floyd by Derek Chauvin. And, the key witness, the hired gun witness for this was a guy named Steiger, who was brought in from Los Angeles. He's the conventional witness. He was the one who was paid $10,000. Nothing unusual about that. He's the one that they asked the magic questions. Do you have an opinion within a reasonable degree of, I forget what the words were, policing certainty? That the amount of force that was used by Derek Chauvin against George Floyd was excessive? Answer, yes, I do. What is your opinion? My opinion is it was excessive for these reasons. Forget about that guy. What's so unusual about this case to me is the testimony that you've had blue on blue. You had in this particular case the chief. You had the chief come in, Medaria Arredondo, who said, it's not part of our training, it's certainly not part of our ethics or values to continue to apply this level of force to a person prone out, handcuffed by their back. No way, shape, or form is that our policy. So you had the chief say that it was excessive. You had Lieutenant Richard Zimmerman, the head of the homicide unit in Minneapolis, the longest serving officer in Minneapolis, quote, pulling him down to the ground, face down, putting your knee on the neck for that amount of time, uncalled for. Okay, that was the longest serving cop. He testified. And then do you remember Sergeant David Plager? If you've paying close attention to this trial, and I'm trying to, the first witness was a woman named Jenna, the very first witness they called. And Jenna was a 911 operator who had the ability to look through a fixed camera at this location because it's a high crime scene. So she was so alarmed by what she saw via that video that she called a supervisor, and that was Supervisory Sergeant David Plager. So he was then called because he was the recipient of that phone call, I think very cleverly, because then they got his testimony in. And he said when Mr. Floyd was no longer offering up any resistance to the officers, they could have ended their restraint. So, I mean, in one way, one shape or form or another, you had three fellow officers, frankly, I think even more, but those three, they stood out to me, rendering the testimony of the hired expert almost irrelevant. So, again, we haven't heard the defense. We haven't heard the defense. I'm just trying to offer at what is almost the end of the prosecution case, where do I think this thing is? And I think that the prosecution has put on a convincing case for the proposition that an excessive amount of force was used against George Floyd. Okay, now that's not enough. Now you've got to prove causation. You've got to prove that this is what killed George Floyd. It doesn't have to be the sole cause. You heard a lot of that testimony in the last 2 days if you paid attention, but it's got to be a substantial factor. So we know a lot of things. We know he had coronary artery disease. We know he had fentanyl in his system. We know that he had methamphetamines in his system. And we also know that he had a knee on his neck for 9.5 minutes. Was the knee on the neck a substantial factor in causing his death? That's what the prosecution must prove. And so in the last 2 days, and one of the things that I wonder about is that, I'm like sitting here with notes and watching TV and keeping track of all this stuff. I know the jury is sitting there sort of dead set focused on what's going on, but this is confusing stuff. And I wonder if they're going to be able to keep it compartmentalized in the way that I'm explaining it to all of you. Because there are a lot of interesting tidbits that I don't think were accentuated, highlighted in the last 2 days. Let me try and speak more clearly. So there were 2 witnesses. Let me show you a picture. First of all, you had Dr. Martin Tobin. Okay, Martin Tobin is the guy who's a pulmonologist, and Tobin came in, he said, for no money. Now, that may make him look virtuous, that may make him look eager, but in a word, asphyxia. Asphyxia is what he attributed George Floyd's death to. Quote, Mr. Floyd died from a low level of oxygen, and this caused damage to his brain that we see, and it caused a PEA arrhythmia that caused his heart to stop. Essentially, he said, a lack of air is what killed George Floyd. And he also had charts that he used. Sorry, I'm not too good at this. And in the charts that were shown to the jury, he explained that it was the force of Chauvin's knee on Floyd's neck, especially when he lifted his toe off the ground and then had like 90 pounds of pressure on his neck, that he said, blocked his ability to breathe, again, in lay terms. And Tobin was, I thought, a very compelling witness, very folksy. He was the one with the Irish brogue. Okay, so they went with Tobin first. Why? Because I think he was the stronger as between himself and the medical examiner. And the medical examiner was the guy who testified yesterday. That's Dr. Andrew Baker. And Baker comes to a different, even though you heard Baker say yesterday, well, you'd have to ask a pulmonologist. You'd have to ask a pulmonologist. He was trying to underscore, rely on Tobin for that, not for me. But I think it's pretty unmistakable that he comes to a different cause of death than does Tobin. The medical examiner is the only one who did an autopsy. And what does he conclude? Cardiopulmonary arrest complicating law enforcement subdual restraint and neck compression. He did not cite a lack of oxygen. He did not cite a lack of oxygen or asphyxia, which is the cause of death that was found by Tobin and other prosecution witnesses. And indeed, and if I had to say for the defense, what was the one single most important exchange in the cross-examination from Eric Nelson, and I have to say I'm kind of underwhelmed by Nelson's cross-examination. He's brought out some good details, but he hasn't had enough theatrics to make sure that the jury hears what the witness is saying. I'll give you a great example on the example I'm about to give. Nelson asks yesterday of the medical examiner, the only one who did an autopsy. And by the way, the autopsy didn't reveal any bruising on George Floyd's neck, even when they peeled back the skin and looked at the muscles. Maybe significant. He was asked whether Floyd died of asphyxiation. That's exactly what Tobin said the day before. And what did he say? Quote, that's something we don't really see. Pressure to the back of the neck resulting in strangulation. That was a big moment for the defense. if I were Eric Nelson, I might have done one of these. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Would you repeat that? I mean, I would have made him say it if I were the defense lawyer like 3 or 4 times, but Nelson didn't. I mean, did the jury pull out the significance of that? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Again, my bottom line is that I think that the case has gone in very well for the prosecution, that those videos are remarkably compelling, and it would be very difficult for a jury to turn away from that videotape and acquit Derek Chauvin. But all it takes is one to hang this jury. All it takes is one to hang this jury. I don't think the prosecution can prevail. Pardon me. I don't think the defense can prevail on excessive force, not in the face of the testimony of fellow officers. And not in the face of that video, which, I mean, say what you will about when the knee first goes on the neck, but for crying out loud, when the guy goes limp, then holy shit, take your knee off his neck already, right? But I'm wondering about this causation, and we've not yet heard from the defense causation experts. So it's interesting, man. It is really, really interesting. Advantage, strong advantage, prosecution. But then again, we're at the end of the prosecution case. So it better be strong advantage prosecution, or they've got a problem. Sorry, I got a little long-winded. I meant to tell you other things, but I went much longer talking about the status of the Chauvin trial, and I hope that was of some benefit. I'll read your comments later. Share this video when I'm concluded with a friend. Think about joining me Wednesday for happy hour, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, open to all registrants of the Smerconish.com daily newsletter. And 2 more promotions, if I may. I am so psyched at the content that we've been putting on my YouTube page. Yesterday, I interviewed Frank Luntz, a remarkable interview with the Republican, advisor and pollster and so forth. It had nothing to do with conventional politics. The interview was about weight loss and civility, and it's posted on my YouTube page. And of course, you got to give TC some play because she deserves it, and that podcast of hers, TC After Dark, is sensational. So listen to that as well. Have a wonderful weekend. I hope to see you on CNN.